The neural development starts at around the 3rd week of the development of embryo. The outer tissue layer of the embryo, also known as the ectoderm, becomes thicker and forms a neural plate gradually. In this developmental age, the neural plate folds inward, forming a groove called the neural groove. The neural folds from the sides of the neural groove become closer together. The neural folds begin to fuse together by the end of the 3rd week. The folds have completely fused together near the end of the 4th week to form the neural tube. The tube will eventually become the brain and spinal cord of the embryo. Bulges and grooves begin to appear in the neural tube. They slowly become more prominent during the 4th week. As you can see from these figures, there are 3 of these bulges formed in the neural tube. These bulges are known as the primary vesicles. They are the prosencephalon, mesencephalon, and rhombencephalon. Prosencephalon, also known as the forebrain, the mesencephalon, which will eventually become the midbrain, and the rhombencephalon, also known as the hindbrain, which will also form the rest of the brainstem and the cerebellum. This end of the neural tube will form the spinal cord. 2 of these vesicles, prosencephalon and rhombencephalon, further subdivide to form secondary vesicles. The prosencephalon will give rise to the telencephalon and diencephalon. The telencephalon will become the cerebral hemispheres. The diencephalon will eventually consist of thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, and ventral thalamus. The mesencephalon does not subdivide further. The rhombencephalon will give rise to metencephalon and myelencephalon. The metencephalon will become the pons and the cerebellum, and the myelencephalon will become the medulla oblongata. The tail of the neural tube will remain as the spinal cord. In the 7th week, the neural tube develops slowly into more brain-like. Out of all the vesicles, the telencephalon will develop faster than the rest. By the 11th week, the structure of the brain will be largely unchanged until birth. The development of the brain will continue after birth, but the structure of the brain closely resembles to a fully developed brain nonetheless. The brain makes tremendous amount of neural connections during child development. The density of brain cells is at its peak between 11 or 12 years old. However, a large amount of unutilized neural connections will be pruned away, creating a more efficient brain in doing tasks such as decision-making and socializing. The gradual developmental changes of human brains do not end until our 20s. As both males and females grow older, muscle mass and bone mass increase. The human brain also continues to develop until our mid-20s. The later development or maturity of human brain begins from the back to the front, which means the frontal lobes, the areas of the brain responsible for problem solving, working memory, language, initiation, judgment, impulse control, will reach maturity much later than the rest of the brain. In other words, the brain doesn't reach full maturity until age 25. Their studies suggest that the brain of adolescents is more vulnerable to impulsive sexual, risk-taking, and instant gratifications. One of the studies showed that the underdeveloped prefrontal cortices and limbic systems among adolescents has been linked to the high rate of drunk driving. The recklessness or impulsivity is mainly attributed to the dependence of adolescents on a part of the brain called the amygdala in decision-making and problem-solving processes more than adults do, because their prefrontal cortex is still under development. The amygdala is often related with instinctive behaviors such as emotion, impulses, aggression, and fear. The brain can be separated into 3 parts: forebrain, prosencephalon, midbrain, mesencephalon, and hindbrain, rhombencephalon. Cerebrum is part of the forebrain and cerebellum is part of the hindbrain. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. Cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain. Cerebrum consists of outer layer of convoluted structure of gyri and sulci. You can find left and right hemisphere, each consisting of different lobes, namely temporal, parietal, occipital, and the frontal lobe. Cerebellum consists of 3 major structures: the anterior lobe, the posterior lobe, and the flocculonodular lobe. While dissected sagittally, we can see that white matter in cerebellum forms arbor vitae. A structure resembles 3 branches that transfer sensory and motor information to and from the cerebellum. Brainstem is made up of multiple parts from multiple brain regions. In the human brain, the brainstem is composed of the midbrain, mesencephalon, and some parts from the hindbrain, the pons and the medulla oblongata. The midbrain is further subdivided into 3 parts: tectum, tegmentum, and the ventral tegmental area. The tectum forms the ceiling, The tegmentum forms the floor of the midbrain. Meanwhile, there's a group of neurons located near to the midline on the floor of the midbrain, known as the ventral tegmental area. The pons is located between the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. There are tracts in the pons that transfer signals from the cerebrum to the medulla and to the cerebellum, and also tracts that transfer sensory signals to the thalamus. The medulla oblongata is the lower half of the brainstem, connected with the spinal cord. It contains the cardiac, dorsal, and ventral respiratory groups and vasomotor centers. This area controls most of the involuntary activities of our body, such as regulating the heart rate, breathing rate, and blood pressure. Limbic structure lies within the diencephalon, which is the aforementioned region of neural tube that gives rise to the posterior forebrain structures. Thalamus is a large mass of gray matter located in the dorsal part of the diencephalon. One of its main functions is to relay sensory and motor signals to the cerebral cortex, basal ganglia, hypothalamus, and brainstem. Hypothalamus is located below the thalamus. The hypothalamus is responsible for the regulation of many metabolic processes and also the activities of sympathetic and parasympathetic processes. To do so, the hypothalamus stimulates or inhibits the secretion of hormones from the pituitary gland by synthesizing and releasing certain neural hormones. Amygdala is a small almond-shaped structure. There is one located in each of the left and right temporal lobes. As aforementioned, it is known as the emotional hub of the brain due to its involvement in determining the emotional balance of situation. Hippocampus is found deeper in the temporal lobe. It has a seahorse-like structure. It has two horns curling back from the amygdala. It plays an essential role in the limbic system due to its involvement in learning and navigation that derive from memory about past experiences.
My name is Siti Syahmina, and I will be explaining about structure and weight of the brain. According to Kumar 2020, brain is a bilaterally symmetrical, soft, gelatinous structure weighing around 400 grams in infants and 1250 to 1450 grams in adults. Therefore, we can assume that adult brain constitutes about 1/5 of our body weight. Okay, if you're talking about the brain, the general idea that should be popped in our mind is that brain consists of cerebellum, diencephalon, brainstem, and cerebellum. First and foremost, I will be explaining about the most important part of the brain, which is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the largest part of our brain and consists of two cerebral hemispheres. Each hemisphere of the cerebellum is divided into lobes, which each have different functions. First is the frontal lobes, which is located in front of our brain, and these lobes are responsible in decision makings, planning ahead, attention, behavior, and emotion. Next is the parietal lobes. Okay, parietal lobes are responsible in processing centers of the brain and also responsible for perception and sensation. Okay, moving forward to our occipital lobes. Okay, occipital lobes are responsible for the process of visual information and control the ability to recognize shape, color, objects, and faces. Lastly, we have the temporal lobes, which are responsible for processing sound and understanding speech. They also form part of the system that controls memory. The left lobe processes receptive language, while the right lobe is processing the musical awareness. Okay, moving forward to the next structure part of the brain, which is the diencephalon. The functions of the diencephalon is to relay sensory information between brain regions and controls many autonomic functions of the peripheral nervous system. The diencephalon is the section of the brain that contains thalamus, which is the largest component, hypothalamus, located inferior to the thalamus, epithalamus, which is the posterior to thalamus, and lastly subthalamus, which is located below posterior part of thalamus. Okay, diencephalon is known as one of the complex part of the brain due to many different structures that are working at the same time. Next, we have the brainstem. Okay, the brainstem is also the important part of our brain that made up of midbrains, pons, and medulla oblongata. Okay, the brainstem is mainly responsible for the basic and involuntary functions that keep us alive, such as controlling our heartbeat and breathing. Lastly is the cerebellum. Cerebellum, also known as the little brain, is a major structure of the hindbrain that is located near the brainstem. Okay, this area of the brain is responsible for balance, movement, coordination, and spatial awareness. Next, I will be explaining about differences between male and female. Okay, note that I will be explaining the obvious differences between these two brains. Okay, first is the size. Okay, male tend to have 10% larger brain than female. However, it does not affect the IQ or how the brain works between both of this brain. Next is gray matter. Gray matter consists most of the brain neuronal cell bodies, and men tend to have nearly 6.5 times more gray matter compared to women. However, for white matter, which is made up of bundles which connect various gray matter, women tend to have 10 times more of it compared to men. Women tend to have a bigger hippocampus, which involved in the memory center of humans, than men. This is why study mostly found that throughout the day, females are more aware and identifying more details, retaining more sensory information than males regarding their surroundings. While for the amygdala, men tend to have a bigger amygdala compared to women. This is why men tend to respond in emotionally, stress, physically. However, interestingly, when exposed to pain, females' right amygdala is stimulated, while left amygdala is activated in case of males. It is well known that the left amygdala is very closely linked with internal function, and this association further explains why females have more acute sensation towards pain compared to men. Points that I will be discussing in the differences between male and female brain is the left and right sides of the brain. The features of left and right hemispheres are vary considerably in men and women. One significant example is men have verbal centers on only left hemisphere, while women have verbal centers on both sides of their hemispheres. This explains why women use both sides of the brain to process information, while men use only left side for most of their activities. Okay, other example also talks about when women expressing their feelings or talking about a person, a place, story, incidents, or any objects, they are found to be using more words as compared to men. This is because men have less verbal centers and less connection between their feelings or memories and their word centers. It has additionally found that women take more interest and have more advantages of expressing their emotions and feelings than men. The next point is the connection movements. Okay, women have more connections moving from left to right at the part of the brain, while men have more connection moving from front to the back. This makes them to have more energy in between perception and action. Okay, this is why men tend to resolve their problems directly, and this is also explained why women are more intended to combine logic and intuition. Lastly, the differences in brain activity. Women's brain has a greater blood flow compared to men's through specific regions. Because of this, women tend to be more empathic, intuitive, and collaborative. And on the other hand, they are also more prone to having anxiety, depression, and eating disorder. Thank you.